Chinese officials said the arrest of the Huawei executive is part of a political conspiracy between Canada and the United States. Huawei is at the center of a fight between Canada and the U.S. The U.S. wants its allies to ban Huawei high-speed technology for national security reasons. Canada has not taken that decision yet, by the way. But right now, is Canada between a rock and a hard place when it comes to diplomatic relations with two global superpowers? And what can we do to lower the temperature? Tonight, I'm joined from Victoria by Hugh, Distinguished Fellow at the Asia Pacific Foundation, a longtime diplomat with postings including Beijing. In Edmonton, we have Wenren, Senior Fellow at UBC's School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. And here in Toronto, Irvin, Studin, the Editor-in-Chief and Publisher of Global Brief magazine. He's also President of the Institute for 21st Century Questions. Hugh, let me start with you tonight. How would you characterize the situation that Canada finds itself in tonight?
Well, I think you put it very aptly. We're between a rock and a hard place. It's certainly not something we'd have looked for to direct Canada-China relations. So now we've had a setback. We're going to have to accept the fact, I think, that relations are going to cool for some period of time. There is now this other issue that's on the table with the arrest in China. And, you know, we need to find ways to lower the temperature and eventually resume the dialogue.
Yeah, we'll talk about ways to lower the temperature in just a moment. Wenren, let me get your viewpoint on this. How would you characterize the situation right now?
Well, Canada is under pressure, extremely nervous. China is very angry. And the United States, if by the latest from President Trump, he's pretty relaxed and ready to make a bargain. He's putting Ms. Meng up as a bait for a bait with China for the upcoming trade talks. That's where we are.
Okay, bait for the upcoming trade talks. We'll talk about that in a moment, too. We'll expand on those ideas. Irvin, what about you? How would you characterize Canada's position tonight?
Well, we're in big trouble. And this has been coming since the original mistake in the USMCA, where under a little bit of pressure, we conceded a great deal and made an enemy of China, to their great shock, and indeed to my surprise, and didn't relieve the source of the pressure. So we have a problem whereby we're neither respected by the United States nor now by Beijing, and we've made an enemy of Beijing unnecessarily. We have the near-term risk of becoming what I call a strategic cripple, where larger countries, more serious countries, as it were, start to play on our turf, and we can't dictate the terms of our existence. I might just add one variable down the road. What if Russia, a third power, starts to bully us on the Arctic space? Where can we resist?
Okay. Let me ask you this, Hugh, and let me come back to something that Wenren said. The United States now we're hearing from Donald Trump saying the White House has spoken to the U.S. Justice Department about the arrest of Huawei CFO in Canada, and that he would intervene if it would serve national security or trade talks. What do you make of that comment?
Well, I think this is extremely dangerous. This is muddling the whole trade issue with what is allegedly a case of fraud, you know, a criminal case that's brought by the Department of Justice. And the last time I looked, there was a separation of powers in the United States. So Mr. Trump may have tweeted this or said this. I'm not sure to what extent he's able to do it, but I do think it's extremely dangerous. I think these things should be dealt with in their own channels, and we should try and avoid any kind of cross-linkage like this.
Wenren?
Well, we have a situation now that President Trump treats all this stuff as a part of the bargaining process. I just wrote my second piece of op-ed on this issue out in today's Toronto Star. Highly suspect of a political motive in this entire new criminal procedure, because the previous offense by another Chinese communication company, ZTE, was properly settled with the civil litigation led by the Department of Commerce. They should have done exactly that process. Now they raise the bar and now lower it by saying, show us your numbers on the trade, and then I will consider releasing her. He made it, Trump made it absolutely clear today. That is it.
Yeah, Irvin, he says the release could be part of a broader deal with China. How is that going to work?
Well, prima facie political interference, and what has not been said yet is that in the extradition treaty between Canada and the U.S. there are explicit provisos militating against Canada relinquishing a prisoner or someone who's committed a prima facie offense on the basis of prima facie political interference. So there you have it. This potentially compromises the case. I'm sure there'll be some litigation around this. Where I think
Oh,
the
wait a
minister...
minute. I just want to say that's a really good point. I just want to expand on that, because are you saying that Donald Trump may have given her lawyer, Meng's lawyer, some good ammunition to keep her from being extradited to the United States?
I'm sure he didn't do it deliberately, but it is an incompetent intervention, and any good lawyer in Canada is a rule of law country with a great legal class. Will see it as political interference and will mobilize that point. I just want to build on what the minister said with respect to rule of law in Canada. I think she was being a little simplistic and misspoke. We have rule of law, but above the rule of law there is a great deal of room for prerogative powers. Her prerogative power is Minister of Justice, the Prime Minister, and that is where politics and strategy and diplomacy come to bear. And so extradition to the United States has a great deal of prerogative power associated with it, as do trade negotiations.
Okay, should this person be extradited to the United States, or is it for us to talk about Hugh?
Well, I think we'll have to see what the legal case is, and I agree with the last comment that the politicization of this by President Trump has probably weakened the U.S. case, and of course it's true, at the end of the day it's the Minister of Justice that makes the call, but she's going to make the call based on the findings of the court, and if there's an appeal on the findings of the appeal, and then make that final decision. So if we're going to politicize this, and it's not going to be a straightforward case dealt with in a legal process, but in fact is going to be put on the table by the U.S. as a trade bargaining chip, then I think that that really does potentially change the outcome of this review. But we'll have to see, of course, how it plays out in the courts.
Okay. Irvin, back to your point, does this really make us, you talked about Article, I think, 32 out of the last negotiations in the free trade agreement. Expand a little bit more on that, and does this also make it look to China as if we're the United States puppet?
Well, I'm not doing a hagiography of Beijing or in anything in their defense. I'm representing, I hope, Canada here, but you can forgive the Chinese for thinking that there is some sort of collusion happening because they were shocked by Article 3210, Section 3210 of the USMCA, which essentially allows Washington to veto Canadian foreign policy prerogatives and ambitions vis-a-vis China, whereas they thought we were aiming to diversify reasonably towards China, which is probably the largest economy in the near future in the world. To their shock, all of a sudden the United States has us and Mexico within their orbit for the foreseeable future. Now, if we were unconscious about that, now they're saying, well, actually you were consciously doing it in a hostile way against China. What gives here? And so they may, partly for propaganda reasons, but partly for policy reasons, say, what gives here? Why would you arrest our equivalent of Mark Zuckerberg essentially in a friendly country at the whim of the United States? This is the Chinese interpretation. We're between a rock and a hard place, that is between two major powers which are struggling for their own interests through our judicial system, on our territory, and through our politicians. I mean, I might go back to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It's very unfortunate that she gave this talk about Canada's rule of law system, which is very important, with the New York Times in the background. To the Chinese audience, again, that says that we are pretty much between Ottawa and Washington all the time. We speak with one voice. So when they're hostile with the United States, they'll go for the weaker link, which is Canada.
Hugh, what do you think?
Well, I have to confess I didn't see the New York Times thing in the background. I think, frankly, that the position the minister's taken is the one that the government has to stick to at the moment. You know, Canada is definitely in a difficult situation, and the best defense that we have is to follow due process and due procedure.
Wenren?
Yes, we are in a hard place, but Canada can actually be proactive. We need to be proactively explaining to the Chinese on the procedure. Even the Chinese are perceiving this as a very cynical play. When Minister Freeland saying we all respect law, you can't walk into a cafe and make choices, preference. The Chinese, they don't see it that way. The Americans basically saying the International Criminal Court cannot charge any Americans, period. That's their way. So a lot of double standards when it comes to power politics, and Chinese are subject to that. But coming back to our discretion, I think we can look at our legal procedure by saying it is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, we tell the Chinese we need to have our judicial independence. On the other hand, we should employ that to vigorously test the evidence when it's provided to us by the Americans. Number one, whether it will meet the standard of dual criminality, which means Ms. Meng must be committing a crime in Canada. Number two, whether there will be a politically motivated charge. Now, I think Mr. Trump has made it clear that political influence is a part of it, and therefore there's potential on those two grounds. The Canadian judicial system will throw that out, and then we can turn to Washington saying, sorry, our judicial branch independently said the case is not a go, and then we release her. Therefore, maybe we can, diffuse the tension and move forward.
Can I add something, Carole?
You absolutely can.
I just want to say, given Trump's rapaciousness and given his proposed carrot to the Chinese and through Canada of negotiating vis-a-vis the Huawei CFO, you can imagine the reverse scenario. If the trade deal doesn't work out, that he'll demand her extradition and threaten us with further tariffs or sanctions of any description. So we come back to a rock and a hard place. We're neither respected now, since USMCA, by Washington nor Beijing. How do we rectify that? Well, we need to bloody some noses. We're going to bloody some noses on the Washington side, by the Beijing side, and keeping our rule of law system. It's a difficult act to follow because we've exhausted a lot of our resource of resistance, but that's the level at which we're going to have to play if we're not going to be a strategic cripple.
Okay, Hugh, do you agree with that, Wenren, that we need to bloody some noses?
Well, the last time I looked, I didn't think Canada was very good at bloodying noses. And, I think we'd have to think twice about taking on the Americans and the Chinese. I think what we need to do is de-escalate this, not bloody noses. We need to have a strong dialogue with the Chinese. We need to investigate what's happening with Mr. Corbyn, for example. And I don't mean we should demand his immediate release and so forth. That's exactly what the Chinese did with respect to the Meng case without even having the facts. We need to get at the facts. We need to try and open some back channels, and we need to defend ourselves by following through on a transparent process, looking at all the evidence. If the evidence doesn't stand up, if it's being politicized, well then so be it. That's the outcome that we should come to.
The documents aren't going to come for some time, so there could be a lot of damage in between. I think they have until the next February 6th or something like that to bring the supporting documents to Canada for potential extradition hearing. Wenren, I saw you shaking your head. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm just saying Hugh is, I appreciate his boldness and his approach recommended. Another one is to be just play the bridge, to be soft. And then, yes, the rule of law, the independence of our judicial system, but do a lot of explaining to the Chinese that a further damage, especially further detention of Canadian former diplomats or such incidents would not help bilateral relations. And a deteriorating Canada-China relations is not in the interest of anybody. And therefore, we should be patient and work with the Chinese. I think if necessary, Ms. Freeland should travel to China face-to-face with her counterpart in Beijing, bring our Department of Justice experts and work with the Chinese, and then turning around to the United States by telling them we're going to vigorously examine whether this case is a broader strategy politically by the Americans to strike on Huawei and China as a part of their trade war or broader strategy to contain China. If that is the case, the extradition request would be thrown out according to the Canadian rules.
I like the use of the word vigor, Carole, but Wenren might overstate that it is nobody's interest that Canada-China's relations should deteriorate. It is in Washington's interest, and that's how we've got to this point. unbeknownst to us. Now, we're going to have to be aggressive. I like the word vigor, but yes, play that bridge, and that's the positive role. We can be aggressive and bloody the nose, but on the other hand, we need to provide a bridge between Washington and Beijing without them playing through us as carte blanche.
So do you all agree that the Global Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, has to travel to Beijing to settle this, to help start the settling of this?
Well, at the right moment. I mean, and I don't think you should hop on a plane tomorrow, that's for sure. But we do need to have a dialogue, and we need to have a dialogue at the right level. And as you pointed out, Carole, there's a period of time now between now and February. I don't rule out that the Chinese might take some further action. I think that would be very counterproductive. I think that's going in the wrong direction. And we need to send the message that we need to calm things down on all sides.
Yeah. What further action do you think the Chinese might take, Hugh?
Well, there's all kinds of actions that they could take. I mean, there are high-level dialogues that are scheduled. They could invent some kind of trade dispute. There's all sorts of things that they could do to make life unpleasant. Already, I understand that there's a call out to boycott Canadian products in China. You know, the Foreign Ministry won't say that's an official action, but it's the sort of pressure that is being brought on other countries.
Okay, Irvin, when you say bloody noses, how would Canada bloody a nose exactly?
Well, on the American side, we're going to have to get tough on the tariff side. I mean, I would still go so far as to say we should not be ratifying USMCA until those things. We've crossed the red line or that bridge 20 times, and we look ridiculous because we exhausted all sorts of resistance. On the Chinese side, though, we won't accept anybody being arrested or detained on trumped-up charges. So we need to be aggressive on those sides. That's the stick, and we need to gain their respect. A Singaporean colleague once said that a small country, and he spoke about Singapore, that behaves like a small country does not have a long-term future. Singapore is a small country that behaves like a medium-sized country, and Canada today is a medium-sized country that is thinking small. We can think bigger and gain their respect. The other side, of course, is to build that bridge between Washington and Beijing, and that does require not only the foreign minister, but the prime minister and all of our leadership to be much more engaged in Chinese affairs on all fronts, and that's a 10 to 20 year strategy, but we better get started on it.
All right, well, we'll leave it on that thought tonight. We'll see what the coming days and weeks bring. Thank you all for coming in tonight. Hugh, Wenren, and Irvin, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.